Learn about the groundbreaking approach of ideas-led growth with Christopher G. Fox. Chris shares his strategic 5-step process, the GRACE method, which can help you act on innovative ideas and expand your business by communicating them more effectively, which I think is super important. You'll also discover how ideas-led growth can build brand reputation and generate leads and help you stand out in a competitive market, maybe even at the same time. So stay tuned and discover how to turn your ideas into actionable growth strategies.
Welcome to the Lead Machine Growth Show, where you will discover how to tackle your tech, master your message, and design your dream. Paul Guyan, the mastermind behind the Lead Machine, introduces you to trailblazers who inspire you to implement life-changing solutions and systems you can model to nurture your leads and get your offers seen by your ideal clients who will invest in themselves and you. Be sure you visit our website at www.leadmachinegrowthshow.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, tune in and get ready to transform your vision into reality.
Welcome to the Lead Machine Growth Show. I'm Paul Guyan, your host, the Lead Machine coach and founder of the Lead Machine marketing agency and mastermind. And I'm dedicated to help you tackle your tech, master your message, and design your dream. And whether you're just starting out or want to take your business to the next level, let's get this conversation started and turn your dreams into reality. I'd like to introduce our guest. Christopher G. Fox is PhD and the founder of Ideas-Led Growth. Chris amplifies voices. As a communications and marketing strategist, ghostwriter, and mentor, he helps people with a passion for change develop and deliver messages that influence and inspire. He works with founders and C-level executives at all sizes of fintech and financial services organizations. He also helps innovators and entrepreneurs increase their presence and impact on the communities they serve. Before his corporate world career, Chris taught literature and culture at the undergrad and graduate level, and he holds a PhD in French literature from the Johns Hopkins University. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming today, and I'm glad that we sorted out our difficulties as we started with our connections. But welcome. Welcome
Yes,
to the
thank
show.
you. I'm so glad to be on the show. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to speak with you, Paul.
Yeah, the pleasure's mine. So, ideas-led growth. I've worked with a number of entrepreneurs and leaders and a lot of times their ideas are rather unfocused and they just don't really have trouble communicating them. And I'm glad that you have that communications background that you can help them refine that. But what is ideas-led growth and how can companies use it to fuel their growth?
Yeah, so ideas-led growth, it's my spin on the whole challenge of differentiating and communicating in a very crowded market. And the reason why I focus on it as ideas-led growth rather than startup growth or revenue growth or all of these other things that I think fall under the umbrella of ideas-led growth is that there's this really common phenomenon that happens. It's much more visible with entrepreneurs, startups, and smaller companies. But believe me, it also happens within much larger companies that are launching a new product, a new service line, or anything else that is a new build for them. And this phenomenon is that when you have an idea that you intend to commercialize, the first place that you go, of course, is to build the product, build the service, and build the business around it. And in that process of doing all the building, it's extremely common for people to lose sight of what is that fundamental idea that sits underneath the innovation, right? Because my basic hypothesis is that every innovation is ultimately an idea about change. And people dedicate themselves to innovations because they believe that there's something in the nature of that change that represents better. And all of that sounds like people will most likely recognize that, they acknowledge that. But the paradox is that when you're in building mode, and there you are, let's say you're building a software product, you're a team of engineers, you're a technical founder, you're building your thing, you're spending all this time and energy doing it. You increasingly lose sight of what is that underlying idea of change for the better, and you stop advocating for it because you're busy building it. Now,
Yeah.
what I'm saying is not that you stop building it and only talk about it. That's not what I mean at all.
Yeah.
But what I do mean is that the reality is you need to focus on both. If you just kind of go into a hole, or one of the ways that I like to put it is, if you go off and innovate in the woods and nobody hears it, did anything
Mhm.
happen?
Yeah.
And the answer is you'll end up building something and really struggling to get commercial traction for it because you're not recognized as the voice of change, advocating for something better. And that process of using the ideas to focus on what the change is, to communicate continually throughout the process, from the very initial idea to conceptualizing it, to launching it, to commercializing it, that idea remains front and center and becomes the thing that really is motivating. It drives commercial results, and it ultimately becomes the mechanism for growing your business.
Yeah, I like that breakdown of the process. One thing that I find with my private coaching clients and in my mastermind is sometimes the entrepreneur has an idea and they just launch off and start building it, but they haven't really tested to see if there's even a market for it. How does
Hmm.
this process help to? I mean, obviously, communicating what the transformation is or the change that you mentioned. I teach transformation. You need to know what the before and after state is going to be for your ideal client before you even start building. Because if you can't do that, like you say, you have to have that transformation or that change, that end result in mind, and everything has to follow and support all that, especially when you're creating software. I have a software engineering background, and very often the visionary, if you're creating software for someone else or if you're creating it for yourself, a lot of times there is scope creep, and you start building things in, and
Right.
it ends up getting much bigger than delivering that end result. And so I think your process reminds me of the agile process. So can you talk a little bit about how your process helps to make sure that there's a viable product that the market will buy?
So yes, I think it's really on two fronts, and I'll talk a little bit about the specific methodology that I use. I call it the GRACE methodology, which is an acronym, and we'll get into it in a moment. What I want to talk about right now is, to answer your question, is that whole idea of finding ideas that are commercially viable. That in itself is a process. So you might have an idea with like a small lowercase I, right? Like, oh, what if, or wouldn't it be better, or could we? Those kinds of hypothetical notions, almost more than ideas.
Yeah.
Um, and the idea that then what you need to do in order to build out that idea is first of all, as you're saying, ideas aren't just things that live in people's head. They're interfaces between your head and the world.
Yeah.
And one of the first things you need to do with testing your ideas is, if the idea is about change, it has to be changing something, right? So you have to much more closely examine what that something is. So it might be a very, very specific industry problem, right? So you mentioned it in the intro that, one of the areas that I focus on is in financial technology and financial services. Some of those things are extremely niche development topics.
Mhm.
I won't get into the details for a general audience, but it can be something very, very arcane in corporate bond issuance or hedge funds or something. The audience for that problem is a very small audience, but they are the audience that knows it and feels it. And
Yeah.
to come back to the point of the question is the idea can't just be completely from outside of their world. It does need to focus on some known or long-standing problem or inefficiency or struggle or missed opportunity within that area. And the more research and the more listening you do around that first, the better informed and the more relevant your idea will be. And that's a really critical part of going from just the little teeny spark that might that might happen in your head while you're walking around or driving around or doing who knows what, to
Yeah.
having it be something that I would consider within my model an idea. Because for me, an idea is only an idea when it has that market relevance and commercial traction. So you have to build it into it before you even get started.
Right. Good point. One of the ideas-led growth strategies that a company I worked with many years ago was was baggage delivery for mishandled bags. In other words, if you've ever traveled, if you do a lot of traveling, you've probably lost your bags. Well, the airline calls that mishandled bag or separated baggage. And what they mean by that is, well, if there's weather, chances are your bag might be on a different flight and you're on a later flight. It'll be there when you get there. Uh, or if you change your plans, your baggage might still go to where you originally were going to go. So there's a lot of factors that affect it. But people are super mad when they lose your bag. I mean, if you've
Right.
ever gone through it, you go down. Working in the baggage services office of an airline is one of the worst places to work because everyone's angry, and so you got to have thick skin in that area. But anyhow, the company that I worked for, we created a system and a network of certified vendors that were certified and insured and everything in our process, and everything was audited and paper free, and we saved the airlines millions of dollars. But even more
Mm,
importantly, we saved uh, we kept the customers longer. They would continue to fly on Delta, which was our first client. Uh, they will continue to fly because we help with that help keep the customer by delivering their bag with a friendly service way. And so our company audited all the billing. We did centralized invoicing and complete auditing of all the delivery processes, which was totally never been done. In fact, nobody believed that we could do it. But we got all the major airlines and grew that from one client to all the majors to over $40 million when I left that company. And so I think sometimes when you have this idea, you have to be willing to be misunderstood
mhm.
because your idea may not be a popular one. It may threaten other things, which certainly it did threaten a lot of relationships in implementing that thing. But sometimes it's for a better common good. So um,
That's right.
you that kind of brings me to the end of my one of my later questions. But what about personal values, and how can you instill personal values into the ideas led growth or your grace formula framework so that those are retained, even though there's this transformation that's happening and there's all these moving things that people who are affected, stakeholders, and all kinds of things can happen while you're doing a transformation or a change that has never been done before.
I love that question because it really does tie back to the thing that I was saying earlier, which is if you're a believer in some idea of better, what I would say is that the way that you figure out what better is, whether it's just having a better travel experience, having more efficient throughput, um, giving people the freedom to free themselves up from work and go deal with their families, go do
Yeah.
whatever they want to do in their personal sense. That sense of better really does come out of your values.
Yeah.
It's your almost like your inner soul of what you see as a better possibility in the world that drives you, and it's the reason why you think it's better that comes down to your values.
Right. And our values always aren't aligned for the common good, but that's a different discussion. Uh,
Right. Right.
and we won't go down that trail, but we don't need to, I don't think. But good answer for that. Uh, that leads me to, how does ideas led growth? And I think we touched on it. How does it fuel the marketing uh, process so that you gain support? And marketing isn't just about selling it; it's also about the stakeholders and your team members and everyone who's involved. There needs to be that loop. So how does that play out?
Yeah, so that's where I think it makes sense to give a little bit more detail about the GRACE methodology that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
So GRACE, it's an acronym. It's generate, reorient, act, communicate, and expand. I'll briefly define each one of those.
Mm,
Generate is focused on the idea generation that we touched on earlier. A
mhm.
lot of those things I was saying at that point of the conversation have to do with generating, refining, strengthening, digging deep into those ideas so that they're crystallized, that they're relevant, and that they're lined up with the needs of whoever the stakeholders happen to be. So that's the generate piece. And
Right.
it's sometimes it can be a very deep digging because an entrepreneur thinks they know the idea, but you end up interrogating a little bit more and be like, well, why are you doing that? Why is that relevant? Why is your talent and experience and approach the best approach for addressing this problem that you see rather than a problem that, you were talking about the airline passengers. Is the passenger the right person to solve that problem? They experience it too, but it was your perspective in understanding all the logistics and delivery things that allowed you to come up with a solution. And
Yeah.
and you figured out something that was improvable in that entire mix of processes. So that's the generate stage. The next one is a little surprising, but it's really important. Reorient. What I mean by reorient is that as you become more focused and you have that clarity around what your idea is, you have the opportunity to reorganize all of your business processes and activities around it.
Mm,
It's really the power of focus and prioritizing. Is what we're doing aligned to the idea or isn't? And that helps you set a hierarchy of priorities for what you choose to do and what you choose to don't do, what you choose not to do, what people within your company or team, if you're a larger entity, what they focus on and how they do it. So that's the reorient phase. And it's really building internal belief. We all believe in this and we all focus on this. So
mm,
that's reorient. Act is really important. It comes before some of the other things. Um, I don't believe in just babble and communicating out into the world with
mm.
nothing behind it.
Yeah.
Acting is really important. And it might be that the action may only be a lot of research. Preferably the market, the act is some kind of pilot or market concept or proof of concept or minimum viable product or some tangible thing
Mhm.
that can demonstrate that you've acted on this idea and that gives you credibility on it so that you have a platform for. Now we're getting to the marketing piece. What's the
Gotcha.
C? The C is communicate.
Mhm.
And unless you do all of that, those important 3 steps before that, communication is just talk.
Yeah.
So the communication is really informed by, well, what first of all, what are you communicating if you don't have a very clear idea that you're passionate about and committed to? What are you even talking about if it doesn't refer to some real thing in the world that you've built or piloted or conceptualized? And that's the act piece. Um, what does it matter if you're communicating one way and your business partner or other team members or employees, if you're a larger company, are saying completely different things about what your company is and what you do? So that's why you have to do all that work before you even get to the stage of communicating. And the principle of communicating is always being on message and always being aligned to what that idea is. it's always an effort, right? You're always striving for
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
but there's no perfection here. But the point is that you focus on maximum alignment and maximum consistency as you communicate. And then the final piece is there's a reason why there's something that happens after communicate and it's expand. It's because the ideas become the mechanism that you use to attract customers, to attract other stakeholders and influencers in our big world of social communication. That's a really important aspect of it.
Mhm.
Um, and also the idea, it's usually the idea is a seed for the next idea that you'll grow to iterate your business several years down the road. And I'm sure you experienced that with the startup you were describing, where you solved an initial problem, but inside that solution was the opportunity to solve two adjacent ideas, or maybe one that was even a little bit deeper down into the problem. And the idea becomes, if when you make the idea a conscious mechanism for how you expand the business, rather than, oh, we're just going to go start doing this random new thing and now we're going to build grocery store carts. That's unlikely to work.
Yeah.
I won't say it'll never work. It's unlikely to work. So the expansion is really about finding those new but adjacent ideas that you can use to run the cycle again. And then you dig down deeper, you generate them, reorient around those, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes this virtuous cycle.
Yeah, and you mentioned iterate, and you also one of the ways that we expanded that process, that delivery management system with an integrated job costing, invoice and audit and control. We actually expanded that to our pharmaceutical business line of business, where we were delivering um, pharmaceutical samples to sales reps, pharmaceutical sales reps, and we took the invoice audit and audit process, the audit and payment process, which was completely paper. We moved that into that adjacent market, which had the same kind of uh, same not the same players, but the same kind of players. We had transportation, we had local couriers, and setting appointments. So we took that and adapted it to and moved it right over, and so we expanded that even further, which kept our headcount down, our employee headcount down, but we build our profits up. But you did
Yeah.
but one of the things I like to call my processes that I develop is called rinse and repeat. And so throughout your grace process, I can see how when you reorient, you discover, oh, there is another stakeholder that we didn't think about. There's a data flow that's either input or an output of this process that needs to be considered because they have the information we have, or they need the information we're generating, so that you might have to go back to the idea or to the generate stage to refine the idea to include this and say, oh, this might have grown a little bit, but it's going to be even better because it supports this goal. And it's without this input from this other stakeholder or this other input, you won't be able to give the result you're looking for. And so at each of those stages, like you said, it's a continuous cycle that you would iterate through as you refine and go along. And so this is not just a one-time thing that you go through. It's an
Mhm.
ongoing thing. And as you expand, you may have to revisit the original idea and say, oh, you know what? Now that we've got we've got market feedback, we need to go and retool and do some more things because this is what they're asking for. And so we can come back and go through this cycle again. Is that what you is that what the grace method is about, the framework?
Yeah, I would definitely say so, especially when it's kind of the point that joins the E back to the new G.
Yeah.
And if you're going to go through another cycle,
Yeah.
I really like the idea of the way that you found something, that there was a similar structure and there was a
Yeah.
similar problem between airlines and pharmaceuticals, and you were able to say, well, okay, let's now reiterate around that as well, which is the way
Yeah.
I heard
And
that story, and it's
yeah.
powerful.
Yeah. It's a powerful. And I wanted to use that because it really represents the grace method is a lot like the simplify, automate, measure, and manage SAM process that we've implemented and we use for massive expansion and iteration through ideas. So
Hmm.
very similar. And I like the word grace. It's a great acronym.
Yeah, it worked out very well, I
Yeah.
must say.
Uh, So what about sustainability and scalability? We just kind of touched on that, but what are some of the advantages and how can other industries besides fintech adopt this and especially when there's a lot of change in the market?
Yeah, I see it working well in all sorts of industries, and although the majority, like significant majority of my clients are in this space, there are other companies that are solving other types of problems that I come across and that I have worked with and continue to work with, based on just my own personal network or people that have gone into other industry areas that also have similar challenges around idea generation and communication. So my point being that I do think that the idea of at the very most fundamental way, the idea of solving a problem and offering a commercial solution that addresses that is nearly universal.
Yeah.
And so that aspect of it, if you start there, which is a very, very early on starting point, and then expand into, well, if it's about the pairing of a problem and a solution, why is the solution that you're offering better than or different from what's already in the market? And if that's true, why is it really better? And why is that really better? And why is that really better? Like, that's the precision of nailing down the idea. I think that works from industry to industry. It's worked with clients that I've had in education and healthcare and some of these other relationships that I've built along the course of my career outside my main industry.
Yeah, I think it would work for any industry because if you're an author writing a book, if it's a nonfiction book, you want to solve a problem and you want it to appeal to who your audience is. And so it would work for an author. It would work for a coach because we're always trying to look at what transformation can we provide our audience? What kind of change can we implement for them? So this process will work. It seems like a universal process to me. Have you had success with smaller solo entrepreneurs and small businesses with this process? I mean, I know that your focus is in the financial services in this area, but
Yeah, absolutely. So even within financial services, there have been many waves of innovation in financial services, and some of them happen within the banks and the large financial institutions, but many of them come from startups. And so there are some startups that I've worked with, startups or companies that are very, very early on in the growth stage.
Mhm.
I've also participated in a few accelerator programs, where a group of startups are brought together and given a small amount of funding and a lot of support to help them into whatever next stage of growth that is, whether it's a funding round or a product release or whatever it might be. And I found the principles very applicable to startup founders. In some ways, the relevance becomes even more important because these are people that have less support. So
Yeah.
when you're truly an entrepreneur or startup founder, the first person on your team it's not all that common to have it be the marketing or communications person.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's a missing piece in the puzzle that you're building because it doesn't feel like a priority. The other aspect of it is as your focus turns to building a product and building a company, you lose sight of that idea, and it helps to have. Sometimes I'll describe it as, I'll work with you as your thinking partner
Yeah.
to pull out your thoughts, strengthen your ability to communicate them, so that at least some percent of, even if you're only dedicating 10% of your time to communicating and advocating for that idea, you're so much further ahead than founders that are doing zero, and that's the majority of them.
Yeah, and you make a good point by getting the marketing and communications in on it early because they're going to help you uh, if they're good, and they should be because you shouldn't bring them on if they're not. They should be able to help you iterate through your idea so that you can communicate it because a lot of times, um, I find that it's without that thinking partner, it's hard to articulate. You might have it up here and you've got this idea, and boy, it's a brilliant idea, but you have trouble communicating it. A lot of times, especially, it's easier for me to help someone with a problem than it is for me to help myself with a problem. And
Very true.
you know, and so it's good to have that helper. So am I getting at is what are some of the challenges that you find that people and companies have when they're trying to implement this strategy?
So one of the first challenges is that um, they don't really have as clear of they're not as able they're not as able to clearly articulate their idea as they think they would be.
Yeah.
And an early problem in the process is that it almost by asking too many questions about why, when I do that, really pushing, well, why, why is that relevant? Why does that matter? And why you? And this is very true for an entrepreneur. If you're founding a startup, one of the questions you need to have a solid answer for, if not in your communication, in your own mind, is why me? Like, what am I bringing to the table that gives me some unique perspective, point of view, capability on delivering some solution here? That part is really can be very challenging for people to recognize and see their own idea in full clarity.
Yeah.
I think that's a really big challenge, and it goes along with the challenge. I don't mean to say that building your product is a distraction, but it does often shift your focus away from the idea, the value, the principles underneath it, because building things is really hard.
Yeah.
And of course, it will occupy all of your time and all of your attention to build that thing, whether it's the product or the company. Um, Recognizing that, oh, this thing that is massively taking up all of my time, emotional energy, intellectual energy, all of it, there's still something new that I have to add to it, which is this ideas level.
Yeah.
That can be a big challenge to get people through.
Yeah, and I can see how that would be a challenge. I fall into it all the time, and you get so you're into the weeds. You can't see the forest for the trees, kind of deal.
Right.
And you need to have retain that vision, yet still be able to, especially if you're the technician or if you're the one leading that development of the product. Uh, Even if you're not hands on, you're still involved in through that iterative process of creating the product, and it can derail you.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
it can
right.
derail you. And sometimes that's the failure of the product right there. And then just losing your way, which
Yeah.
which
Losing
happens.
losing your way. And that's another one of I would say the additional benefits of looking at it through the lens of ideas is that keeps you focused on what your way was.
Yeah.
And so if you feel like you're deviating from course, or if you're going off the rails a little bit, or whatever the metaphor is,
Yeah.
you have that visibility and that understanding of what to get back onto, instead of just
Right.
continuing to drift and meander.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. So what is the future for this ideas led growth movement that you've created?
Yeah, so the future is, I think for me, the future is getting that message out further. I would love more people to think about what they're doing through the lens of ideas, to understand and apply some of these principles in a way that adds value to them. And in order to get to that point, we've mentioned a few times that I focus very heavily within this financial services world, and I do some work around the edges with others. I want to get more of that messaging out.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of, I don't have the plans in place yet. I don't have it launched. But I've got a lot of the pieces for a digital course that would be more generally focused on startups and founders and how they could use some of these principles. I think like uh, many founders of a business, I have a book knocking around in the back of my head At some point, I need to sit down and get that book out into the world. So those are the things that are next, but it's taking the principles and the methodology of ideas-led growth and making them more accessible. They're tried and tested in a very tough industry of financial services, which, it not only is the industry itself complex, but there's so many layers to it of, technology, regulation, markets, global, like there's all of the pieces are interacting in financial services. And I feel like if I can get it right there, then a lot of the pieces of it are going to be very relevant to all sorts of other industries, which are also complicated in their own different ways.
Right, right. So we're almost out of time. As we wrap up, Christopher, what are 3 things that our listeners can do today to put these ideas at least into action?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to put to do is sit down with yourself and have a very serious conversation. And if not with yourself, then with someone who you could trust as a thinking partner,
Mhm.
and push yourself as far as you can on that, just even that basic question of, why am I doing this? Why does it matter? You're going to answer that question and you're going to come to an answer. And the hardest part of that process is to force yourself to say that answer is not enough. I need to go down the next level and ask it again and ask it again until I really get down to the root. And I would say that's the first thing that people can do. The next thing that people can do is, you don't have to have these things 100% perfect and settled
Mhm.
before you say anything to anyone. Start looking around for conversations and activity about the general topic that your idea falls in. See what people are talking about, see what people are saying. If it's an environment on LinkedIn, like, yeah, I've got lots of ambivalence about the value of LinkedIn as a platform, but it is still there as a
Mhm.
business interaction platform. Jump in on comments a few times, start posting things, start talking about some of the general concepts around your idea, and you'll find that often has a benefit in focusing your idea, like, oh no, that's what I really think. If you're saying it in response to someone else, or if you're responding to people's comments to what you say.
Yeah.
I'd say those two, I'd leave it at those two things really.
Yeah, I have, I follow a number of thought leaders in different areas in my purview as a technology and marketing coach. And one of my peers sent out a newsletter the other day and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about creating this thing, and it will do this and this and that." And and he described it. And he's a really good copywriter, by the way. And so he described it well, and he built some interest in it. He had this idea well thought out, and he said, "Reply if you would buy it."
Hmm.
And I replied and said, "Yep, I would." Because I bought from him before, and his stuff is stellar. It's not beautiful, pretty, but it's very, very useful. Saves me tons of time. And so that's the an example of the communicate and act. He took action before he built the product, but he had already had a real
Right.
good concept for the product. And he replied the next day. He had 200 people reply to his message, and that's I'm sure that once he has that product built, he'll build it with his cohort, and then he'll release it further, and it will continue to expand, which is, just a great example of what you're talking about.
That is, and I'm seeing a lot of that of people that have because they've built their ideas strength and their communication strengths, they almost, it's like putting a feeler out there and seeing what
Yeah,
happens. So it's a lot easier to build a product if you start with a blog post or a newsletter post
yeah,
than to develop the thing and realize that it might fall flat.
right.
So that's another way that this process becomes a virtuous cycle, because it gives you room to market test ideas in a way that you might not if you're really just starting from nothing and sitting in a room by yourself trying to make something.
And working in a vacuum. Yeah, and you
Yeah.
mentioned social media, LinkedIn, and those are great places, and forums, and discussion groups, and there's lots of communities out there that these days you can join. Uh, and then you can do posts like that. You can be a thought leader. You can mention your
Mhm.
ideas and say what I'm thinking about, is and to see if you get any traction, you might be able to say, "Oh, I can get some viability out of this idea." By
Yeah,
this
that's
interaction.
right.
And you
That's
could
right.
also build some connections of people who might be your initial cohort to pilot out your idea.
That's
Uh,
right. Yeah, thought
this is
leadership is not always about having a definitive answer or a final product.
right,
There's also a level of it, which is it's really about inquiry and curiosity and building connections and probing the market.
right, right. Well, I've really enjoyed our discussion today, Chris. Um, you have a newsletter that I like you to tell folks about how they can connect with you and get your newsletter and learn more about ideas led growth.
Sure, sure. So there are a couple of ways to connect with me. One is I am fairly active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there as Christopher Fox, as founder of Ideas Led Growth. I'm the only one of those, so it's easy to find.
Yeah.
You'll also recognize me. The logo of Ideas Led Growth is the idea sled, which is a red sled. So if you see my face with a red sled, you'll
Okay.
know it's the right person. So that's
Okay.
number one. Number two is I do a newsletter 4 times a month. You can access the sign up page for that newsletter at ideasledgrowth.com/newsletter. That's ideas led growth, all one word, no hyphens or anything like that, just all run together.
Gotcha. Excellent. Well, thanks again, my friend. And remember, faith and action go hand in hand. So put the pedal to the metal and keep until next time on the. I just blew my
Uh,
outro. Remember, faith and action go hand in hand. So keep the pedal to the metal. And until next time on the Lead Machine Growth Show, I'm Paul Guyan and Christopher Fox. Thank you, brother, for coming.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
You bet.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lead Machine Growth Show with Paul Guyan, where we show you how to tackle your tech, master your message, and design your dream so that you can transform your vision into reality. Remember to visit our website at www.leadmachinegrowthshow.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Lead Machine Growth Show.